Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See detail.
Hello, Duke fans, and welcome to episode number 645 of the Duke Basketball Roundup. We are in the middle of Labor Day weekend. It is the start of September, Sunday, September 1st, 2024. Why is it September already? We don't know, but what we do know is this. The Manny Diaz era is 1-0. Duke football wins on Friday night over Elon. We are here to talk about that. We have some basketball news or just basketball content to cover, but before we get into all that, I am Donald Wine. I'm your host for this episode. I have Jason Evans with me. Jason, happy Labor Day weekend. How's it going in your neck of the woods?
Yeah, it's pretty nice, kind of quiet. We don't have anything big planned for Labor Day weekend, so I'm not as exciting as you. Last time I asked you that question, you gave me like 5 minutes of awesome content. Sorry.
Well, I was gallivanting around the world or wherever I was at the time. It's been a nice, not necessarily quiet Labor Day weekend. I've been watching a ton of football. That's been the main thing. But I will say this is weird. Like my friend who went to Miami, it just became a U.S. citizen. So we had a nice little party for him last night. So that was pretty cool. But other than that, it's been football, Jason. There's been a lot of it on TV. Shout out to all my teams because all my teams won over the weekend. And shout out to some of my haters because some of my hating teams, they lost. So that's cool. We'll talk about that in a second. But let's talk about our Duke Blue Devils. Again, first game of the season against Elon at Wallace Wade Stadium. The new Devils deck looked pretty cool, Jason. But Duke looked even better on the football field, winning 26-3 to open up the season. They are 1-0, obviously, on the year. Jason, we can start in a couple of places, but I want to start with the defense because I think there's a couple of stats that I think were incredible.
Wait, you think? You sure?
Yeah. First of all, the only thing I was really upset about with our defense is that we gave up that very late field goal to make it where Elon left with 3 points. I wish we could have kept the goose egg.
I want to point out, and this is not meant to put down or anything the guys who were playing on that final drive, but Duke had subbed very liberally. Let's just put it this way.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
Elon hang on, I got a stat. Because I know you want to do stat, but before that final drive, Elon had less than 100 yards of total offense. They put up 50 yards on that last drive where they had their backup quarterback in and we had most of our subs in. And again, our subs are important. I'm not saying anything negative about them, but yeah, the performance are starters and the immediate backups put in on this game, truly dominant.
I should say that Elon did have a field goal earlier in the game that hit the upright and went out. But hey, that doesn't mean anything. Luck is part of this game. But I want to say these two stats about our defense.
It was a 48-yarder that went 47 3/4 yards.
Yep, that sounds terrible for them. Sounds great for us. But here are the stats that I wanted to cover. First of all, 16 tackles for loss. Let me read that again. 16 tackles for loss, the most for a Duke team in a game since 2007. I believe that was one of the first few games of the David Cutcliffe era. 8 sacks, Jason. Here's the stat that I want to tell you. 8 sacks is the second most in one game in Duke history. The most we had were 9 sacks against a Miami team in 2019 led by now coach Manny Diaz. Which I think is very cool. He's now on the right side of history when it comes to that. But Jason, I mean, Manny Diaz is a coach that was a defensive coach, defensive coordinator. He's known for his defense. And last year, as we know, our defense was stingy, one of the stingiest defenses in the country. And that seems to have not changed in this era. But I really, really enjoyed the fact that our team was able to lock it down for almost the entire game.
Yeah, let me give you a little bit more on those amazing stats, the 8 sacks, the 16 tackles for loss. By the way, it is worth noting, you said this on the preview. We did that against a very experienced Elon offensive line. Now, I want to be clear. This is not this is not a power conference team, not even close. Duke was expected to to dominate them physically, and we did. But frankly, Elon was going backwards almost as much as they were going forwards on offense. They had 24 pass attempts and 36 rush attempts. That's 60 plays. And they went backwards on 16 of them. That's 27% of the time. That's unreal. And by the way, there were a bunch of other plays that don't get counted as tackles for loss, where basically they got stopped for no gain. They got stopped for maybe 1 yard.
Or pressures and stuff like that forced incompletions.
Yeah, they were basically, they were in second and third and long every single series. Like, it was rare that you're like, okay, Elon's facing the 2nd and 2 here. You know, the whole playbook's open for them at this point. No, they're basically in 2nd and 9, 2nd and 13 on every single drive. It was crazy. They ended up averaging 0.8 yards per rush. That's
only 30 total rush yards, and 100, as you mentioned, until the last drive they were under 100 yards total. They ended with 140. And I think the other thing, Jason, is Elon only crossed midfield twice, and one of those was a drive that started after they intercepted us, the lone interception of the game, and they started at our own 45-yard line and went like 6 yards before giving the ball back to us. So this was a team that, for the entire game, it felt like first and long, or, first down, 2nd and long, 3rd and long. And when you do that, you're able to put more pressure on the quarterback. You're able to, get fresh guys in, maybe have like a nickel package where you can bring in guys and kind of stop all the passing lanes. But it also just, experience is one thing, but confidence is really big in this game. And Elon had none of it on Friday night, because no matter, anytime they got like a nice play, we got 6 yards, bam, here comes our defensive line or our linebackers. They get a tackle for loss, and then all of a sudden is back to 3rd and long again.
Yeah, and look, the reality is it's hard to tell how much of this was whether Duke truly has a dominant defense, or whether Elon was a completely overmatched team playing against just a bigger, more physical, more gifted athletically and gifted from a skill standpoint team. It's probably a little mix of both. But it's worth noting, Manny Diaz was known at Penn State as a defensive genius. And I think it's going to be tough for legitimate Power 4 conference opponents to put up 20 plus points on this Duke Blue Devil team. We've got a tough schedule ahead of us. And it looks like there's some really good teams in the ACC. Miami. But I think this Duke team is going to be in a lot of games, because this defense appears to be a defense that, especially on the line, is going to just give teams fits all day long.
Last year, entering November, Duke was one of the 4 best defenses in the country. The other 3 defenses that it was being compared to,
I remember,
Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State, of course, where Manny Diaz was defensive coordinator before he came here. So I really liked what I saw in defense. Jason, quickly, let's switch to the offense, because the offense, I think...
Hey, actually, wait. Before we
got one more.
I have one last note on the Elon offense. Mm-hmm. Their MVP on offense, no question about it, was their punter. which that's something. But
you got a lot of work.
That dude bombed a couple punts the first 2 times out, and then he was a cagey one. His 3rd punt was like short, and so it bounced and ended up going for 60 yards because it bounced. I was like, damn, this guy, he was pinning us back there until he got a bad snap, and then it was all over for him.
But I will say, the first offensive series, as I switched to the offense, I thought the first offensive series was great because he did one of those really big punts, and we were able to kind of march down the field. And I think it was a shame that we only got 3 points out of that first possession. But I think the one thing about the offense that didn't click as well as we were hoping was the run game. We only had 59 running rush yards on the afternoon or on the evening. But I thought Maalik Murphy, for the most part, was fine. 26 for 40, 291 yards, 2 touchdowns in that lone interception. And the one thing, Jason, I'll say about the offense that I think was the best thing that we heard, 0. The number of sacks that they gave up, 0 sacks. You want that. Maalik Murphy had a clean uniform, and we want your quarterback to have a clean uniform.
Well, and also 0 penalties. There was actually 1 penalty that I think it was a defensive penalty that got declined, but I mean,
0 accepted penalties.
In terms of the scorebook, 0 penalties is a really good number. Look, we knew Maalik Murphy had a big arm and would stretch the field, and man, he was going for it a lot. You mentioned the completion percentage, which wasn't it's not terrible, but it wasn't huge. And that was because we were going for it a lot. I almost feel like we went for it a little bit too much. There was a 4th and 6 play where we lobbed it into the end zone in the second quarter. Really risky play on 4th down. I kind of feel like there had to have been some better plays that we could maybe take a shot at, but we were clearly just going for it a lot with Maalik Murphy, and it worked sometimes, and that's a huge weapon to have.
And you know what? When I glossed over the 26 for 40s, because I wasn't necessarily concerned about it. The reason why is because a lot of those deep balls that you saw, they hit hands. They were, I mean, it wasn't like he overshot him by 10 yards. They were right there. And either the Elon, defensive back made a nice play, or it hit our hands. It was just a little too long. So that timing was what was missing. Is the timing is going to get there as the season continues. And those, like, 4 weeks from now, I'm more confident that those balls are hitting hands and these guys are catching them and running them into the end zone.
Yeah, I was going to say we were like this close to ripping off a few more big plays. And I think a couple of those balls that ticked off those fingertips are going to get caught in some games. And if we caught them in this game, this is a 35 to 3 essentially score. And you're not even talking about the offense other than to say how impressive it was. So I'm not going to let that worry me too much. I agree with you. The rushing attack was pretty weak. But I will note, they were really loading up the box. They had all their guys up close to the line of scrimmage because they've got some really good defensive backs and safeties on this Elon team. And they were hoping to force us to pass and not let us. They didn't want us to run all over them. And, I'm not going to say we fell into that trap because we still put up a pretty nice offensive number, but that was the Elon plan on defense. And while it wasn't like super effective, it does explain a little bit of the struggling to only get 2.2 yards per carry on defense. I'm sorry, on offense. I wanted to note one thing. The interception was a pass that was overthrown, and we did see Maalik Murphy overthrow a few of his guys. He seemed to have, if he was going to miss on a pass, it was usually overthrown. But I noticed that our tight end, Nicky Dalmolin, didn't even really reach up for the ball. I wonder if maybe he thought it was for someone else or there was a miscommunication or something like that.
Yeah.
Because I think that perhaps if he reaches up for it, it doesn't turn into an interception. But that was sort of the one negative play that we had on defense the whole time. I'm sorry, on offense the whole time. Star Thomas, the new running back, did have a fumble at one point, but our offensive line fell on it to avoid a disaster. And the bottom line in this game, to me, total yards, Duke 351, Elon 140, and again, they got 50 of those yards on the final drive. 351's a really big number for an offense, and holding a defense 140 or technically under 100. That's massive. It shows you the degree to which Duke really dominated this game, and I'm super excited to see us play Northwestern next week. See if we can keep it going.
The idea of the running game being established. I mean, remember last year we had Jacquez Moore, who's back on this year's team. We had Jordan Waters, and both of them were capable of handing you 150 yards, like off the rip. And so I think the book on Duke was, hey, yeah, they have a guy who can throw the ball, but they're going to establish the run first. And so they figured by limiting the run that they would be forced to pass. And I think the great thing about the 291 is in that timing is, hey, if we get better run, rushes, right, where it's second and short, third and short, we have the ability to try more things. That also means the defense has to step in that one extra half step to make sure that, if you do a play action, you can do that half step in, and then all of a sudden the dude is more free than some of these guys were. But I did want to shout out a couple of our wide receivers. Jordan Moore, of course, he's
you read minds. I was about to do this. Go ahead.
Yeah. Jordan Moore, 7 receptions for 112 yards. Like, of course, just absolutely, it felt like whenever there was a big play, Jordan Moore was at the end of it. Eli Pancol, welcome back. First game since 2022, 7 receptions, 81 yards, 1 touchdown. He had that one, really long play that almost ended in a touchdown, and honestly, like, probably should. Like, there's just like, if he breaks one more tackle, he's falling into the end zone, but he falls just short. But I'm glad that he got a touchdown in his first game back on the field in over a year. And again, he was going to be the number 1 wide receiver last year before he got hurt. Now that he's back, Jordan Moore is the number 1, but Eli Pankel's the number 1A. And I think those two guys so far have shown that they can really, make the big plays and move the chains, which is exactly what this offense is going to need.
Yeah, my last thing in this game, just really quickly, is just a little note. With about 6 minutes left in the game, there was a guy for Elon who got hurt and was walking off the field, and suddenly he, like literally within a yard of the sidelines, he sits down and lays down, and they take an official timeout and they spend 2 or 3 minutes tending to this poor guy who was walking off on his own power moments earlier. I was like, what is this Bush League BS, Elon? This guy could have easily gotten to the sidelines and you wouldn't have had to delay the game. In fact, I thought I saw a guy on the sideline sort of giving him the with his hands like, hey, get down, because they needed a break.
Mm-hmm.
We talked, you and I reflected on what Manny Diaz said were the keys to an early season game. And one of them was conditioning. This Duke team was in good condition. Came the fourth quarter, they were not winded at all, and Elon was sucking wind in a big, big, big way. I know that these guys have been putting in the work for a while now to get in good shape. It showed in this game, and I just want to give a hat tip to them and point out that Elon had to sort of do a dirty little trick to get an extra timeout because they were so gassed.
I totally missed the biggest thing that I saw about this offense that I have not seen from a Manny Diaz team. And remember, I watched some Manny Diaz-led teams in the past at Miami. The reason why they were gassed is because we were going fast on offense.
Oh, yeah.
We were averaging like 10 seconds between possessions or between snaps. It was lightning quick. And again, the fact that we were not gassed after doing that, that's going to tire every team out that we face. That's going to really frustrate every team. And the fact that they were having to do, some of those gamesmanship things, man, this is really, really fun. But Jason, as we wrap up with the football really quickly before we take a break, I did want to note a couple of the ACC victories or lack thereof from this weekend. And we're not even going to go to last week where FSU lost in Ireland. But this week,
start with your Miami Hurricanes. That's a big
I'm starting with them. I'm starting with them. Hey, Florida, what's up? How you feeling this afternoon? Or feeling this morning? I know how I'm feeling. I'm feeling great after Miami beat them at the Swamp 41-17. Look, Cam Ward, I thought looked terrific in his debut. He's a guy who, has been one of the heralded, portal transfers. He came from Washington State, and I thought he looked great. But the funny thing is Miami was one of those teams that, like, every year, right? And I have to go through this. Every year they're ranked in like the top 25, sometimes top 15, and everybody's like, oh, Miami's back. And then like 2 weeks in, we're like, Miami's not back. Oh, no, Miami, like after this weekend, people can feel good about the fact that Miami looks really good and looks like one of the better teams, if not the best team so far on the weekend in the ACC. We had a couple of teams that did not do well. Virginia Tech losing to Vandy on the road in overtime. Clemson, I think, is the really big disappointment, getting absolutely beasted in Atlanta to Georgia. Now, losing to Georgia, no slouch.
Yeah, there's no shame
34 to 3. 34 to 3 is a problem. Jason, there's an interesting stat about Clemson. I don't know if you know this. Clemson is one of 4 teams that have 0 portal transfers. And in fact,
I did know this, yes.
They're the only team since 2018, or I'm sorry, one of 4 teams since 2018 to have never started a portal transfer. The other 3, Jason, are the service academies, Navy, Army, and Air Force, because they are not allowed to accept transfers.
Right.
So this is something where keep an eye on this, because I feel like this is the system, and yesterday the system failed them in a big way.
Yeah, and I have to tell you, the Clemson fans out there are, the word is that they're getting pretty frustrated at Dabo Swinney, that they're sort of like, come on, why are we not using this weapon portal that every other program in the country is taking advantage of? And Dabo's just like, I don't go, you're either a Clemson guy or you're not. And if you're not, I don't want anything to do with you. And on the one hand, I'm sort of like, I guess I kind of admire the notion of that, maybe. But on the other hand, dude, you're driving 55 on the highway, and I know the speed limit says 55, but everyone else is going 70, and it ain't working. So maybe it's time to at least try to go 57 or 60 miles an hour, because, boy, you're being passed. You're being passed by every other program out there. And I don't know. I'm not saying Dabo's on the hot seat, but it might be a little tiny bit warm under his ass. I'm just saying.
I think it's more about I don't know if they're trying to fire him, but they're definitely a change in philosophy is definitely on the hot seat. If he can't get it together with this, because remember, yesterday, I get it's the first game of the season for them, but they're playing Georgia, a team that most people expect to be at or near the top of the rankings all season long. Clemson is a team that everyone expects to compete for the ACC title and get into the playoff. If that was a playoff game, people are turning that game off in the second quarter because it was over at that point. And you don't, and as a Clemson fan, you do not want to see your team look so pedestrian against a team that you think is your peer. I think that's the real big issue here, but also just puts the ACC in a bad light because when you go down to it and they say, oh, Clemson's the best of the best, what do they do against the SEC? They got smoked. Thankfully, Miami is here to save everybody from the ACC, SEC talk with their victory. But again, I think when you have those early season battles against big time opponents and in big time conferences, you have to win them or at least show that you can hang with them for later on, because then later on people are going to say, oh, that Clemson team, they got disrespected by Georgia. Why should they be in the playoff against another really, really good team? So that's the real issue for them. Florida State obviously had the other issue. They lost in Ireland. They play on Monday night against BC, so they really have to get back to it. And I think, Jason, it's also these little games, right? You know, Virginia Tech losing to Vandy is not a good sign for the ACC. We have a one coming up on Friday. We get to go to the Northwestern's new house by the lake. They're very small, temporary.
It looks pretty cool though. It looks cool.
Yeah, it looks pretty cool. But we'll talk more about that when we preview that game. But again, Duke Northwestern may not be a big deal in the grand scheme of the national sense of things. But you want to say when the ACC comes back, they can go, hey, we go up against Big 12 or Big 10 teams and we beat them, right? UNC, they lost Max Johnson for the season, but they beat Minnesota. ACC is taking that as a win, no matter how Pyrrhic it was.
Man, that is not. Let's be clear. That is not. Minnesota might be the worst team in the Big Ten. They're way at the bottom of the Big Ten.
And they should have won, but they blew the field goal at the end. Yeah. So I mean, again, you want to have a better showing against those other big conferences to show that the ACC is, a better conference than people lay it out to be. This weekend didn't do a lot to help that argument, again, save for Miami and maybe a couple of other folks. Jason, anything else on the ACC before we
I just wanted to note really quickly, there were some teams that even though they won, it doesn't put a good look on the ACC the way they won. SMU beats Nevada 29-24. I mean, Nevada's not terrible, but that's a game that you would expect an ACC team to do better in. NC State really struggled with Western Carolina. That should not have been nearly as competitive as it was. That was a competitive game throughout the entire first half for sure. And NC State's supposed to be one of the better teams in the ACC. They are certainly a team that feels like, they belong alongside the Florida States, the Clemsons, the Miamis of the ACC, and NC State is ranked. And for them to come out and struggle for a while with Western Carolina was not a good look for the ACC. I wanted to note that Stanford lost their opening contest. They lost to TCU. There's no great shame in that. But new member of the I was just looking down the ACC scoreboard. I was like, Stanford, wait. And I went, oh, wait, of course. They are in the league.
And I will say, Jason, I watched like 90% of that game before I just fell asleep.
Yeah.
Stanford actually looked fairly good, right? And they were holding their own. And for a team that's been picked to be dead last in the ACC, they didn't look like that against TCU. But at the end, they just bottled it. And I think that's where the good teams are separated from the mediocre teams. So the good teams can persevere through that. And the mediocre teams are going to find a way to falter. And that's what happened in Stanford's case. Yeah.
And then the other one I wanted to note was Louisville. Louisville put up 62 on Austin Peay. And it was 62-0 was the final score there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, again, Austin Peay, it's a contest between schools that are in no way belong on the same football field together. But still, 62-0 is a big number, and it's worth noting they did that. They only scored 3 points in the fourth quarter. They scored 59 points in the first 3 quarters of that game. Ouch! That's, by the way, better than the Louisville basketball team did most of last year.
Right, they scored more points than them. Yeah, but again, the one thing you can take away from that is a team came in and did its job against the team it was supposed to beat. Right, like that's what you want to see the ACC teams do against the minnows of college football. You want them to take care of business. Like Ole Miss yesterday put up 76 points. I don't know who they played, but I know they put up 76 points. That's what you want to see. I mean, you don't necessarily want to see, you don't necessarily care necessarily what the final score is, but you want to look at the scoreboard and look at the stat sheet and go, that team dominated. 26-3 against Elon. Hey, on paper, people may say, oh, they kind of, didn't really do well. But on paper, when you look at those stats, Duke took care of business. And that's the idea here. And you move on because all these games add up. And that's what you want to see. When we're going bowling, doesn't matter who you beat. It matters about the number of teams that you beat. We need 6. We got 1 so far. We're going for number 2 on Friday.
Hey, I just want a really quick note because you mentioned a few of the games where ACC teams played SEC teams. There are a couple more of those coming up this coming week. NC State plays Tennessee. That's a huge game for NC State. It's being played in Charlotte, which, I don't know if you want to call that a neutral site or not, but that will be a major contest for NC State because Tennessee is a very good SEC team. And then the other one was there's another ACC SEC matchup. Although I'm like, really, this is California plays Auburn at Auburn. I'm Auburn's going to be probably a 10-point favorite in that game or so. But if Cal manages to at least keep it close, that looks kind of good for the ACC. I don't know that people are processing that Cal is part of the ACC yet.
Hey, they're ours now. It's the All Coast Conference now. We got both the sea to shining sea when it comes to the ACC.
Yeah, and also this coming week we get some of our first conference games. Georgia Tech plays Syracuse. There are a couple other conference games. I'm trying to remember who else there is. I'm looking at my list. Virginia plays Wake Forest. So yeah, we're beginning to get some senses of what this conference looks like from a football standpoint.
And Georgia Tech is they're 2-0 and they're still tops in the ACC because they have the 1 win over Florida State in Dublin. But we'll leave the football here, Jason. Let's take a quick break. And on the other side, we have some basketball content to talk about with Duke Blue Planet. And also, we're getting back to name, image, and likeness, but there are some interesting numbers coming out in a new report by the New York Times. Stay with us.
With the Lucky Land Slots, you can get lucky just about anywhere.
Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to... Has anyone seen the bride and groom?
Sorry, we're here. We were getting lucky in the limo and we lost track of time.
No, Lucky Land Casino, with cash prizes that add up quicker than a guest registry.
In that case, I pronounce you lucky.
Play for free at LuckyLandSlots.com. No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 18+. Terms and conditions apply.
All right, we are back. And Jason, I know you watched this. I watched this, and I'm sure a lot of you out there already have. Duke Blue Planet dropped his first episode of the season over the weekend. And
love it.
It was a fun one because it deals with the Olympics. Of course, it starts with Kamen Malawach playing in the Olympics and the guys kind of gathering for a watch party when the U.S. played South Sudan. And while they're watching...
By the way, did you notice in that watch party, Isaiah Evans is like running commentary.
I was just going to say, Isaiah Evans is a character. We've already known this. We've already seen this. But it felt like he was the only one mic'd in that episode because I mean he's a chatty dude, not in a bad way. Like, love the kid. And
by the way, he's one of those guys who has a rep for talking on the court. Like when Isaiah scores, he lets you know that he scored.
And when he doesn't score, he'll let you know he's about to score. So like that's the thing. Sometimes it gets under people's skin, and that's when he takes advantage because he's always cool, calm, and always the thing about it is he always has a smile on his face. He's always joking around. So I think that's really funny. But it led to them watching this game led to them playing what we are calling, or at least what they're calling, the Brotherhood Games. And it was a bunch of teams split into groups of 3, and they were competing in several different sports, 3x3. And we have what do we have? 2K tournament, trivia, beach volleyball, and then basketball shooting drills. And to make a long story short, because watch the episode, is still very fun. The winner of this was Team Foster. Team Foster was led by CFos, Con Knipple, and Stanley Borden. Stanley Borden, apparently the brain of the team for trivia. And then Con was just absolutely the warrior on the beach volleyball court. Man has some form, Jason. I've played volleyball.
Oh my God. The highlights we saw.
That man has some form.
Khan can play some volleyball. I mean, like, I'm surprised that the Duke volleyball team hasn't already signed him up because, I mean, he looked really good.
The other thing is everybody on the team is taller than a net, just about. So
right, exactly.
It looked like they were playing on a smaller net, but it wasn't. It was a normal sized net.
I was watching. I was like, is the net small? And then I went, no. Everybody's 6'5" or taller.
Everyone's 6'5" or taller. Yeah. But Jason, I think the one thing, there's a couple of things I'm going to take from overall here. The 3x3 tournament that they did, or at least the little bracket that they did. First of all, they need to keep doing these because we need them in 3x3 in the 2028 Olympics. We need to get that gold back. But also after some of these games, right? And I mentioned the team that won. After some of these games, I liked that John Shire afterwards was like, hey, I liked the competitive drive. We've heard that word competitive throughout the episode. Shire even has a shirt that says compete on it, which I would like. So dbrpodcast@gmail.com if you have a 2x for me. But he also mentioned that he wants the guys to move even quicker, to have more sense of urgency to pick up the ball. So he said, even after the other team makes a basket, I want you moving. I want you moving quick to get the ball in and going up floor. So Jason, I'm looking at this team developing the skills it's going to take for them to be a fast team, right? Or not necessarily, breakneck speed, but at the same time, they want to get the ball up because they know with the ball in their hands, they can cause some damage. And by getting the ball out of their hands as quickly as possible, they're able to do that many, many times in the game. So I really like that. Jason, I think the one thing you take from the everything in the Brotherhood games is that I can't believe I'm saying this. We've seen Cooper Flagg lose.
Yeah.
For the first time, or lose the second time because he was on USA Select. But it wasn't, and this is no disrespect, right? But like the fact that he is losing a couple of these games, it might help, right? To become a guy who's even going to be more, the competitive fire that he has. The fact that we have to talk about him like quote unquote losing, a competition that's meant to be fun is something where we're like, hey, this guy, we've heard this year that he has won in everything, that his team wins everything. And so now it feels like the other guys are stepping up to the plate in terms of competitive desire. And that's what's going to make this team even better.
I can't believe that Caleb Foster and Con Knippel and Stanley Borden beat the 3-on-3 team that had Cooper on. I looked in my notes. I can't find in my notes. Who were Cooper's teammates?
It was Team Proctor. So Team Proctor was Tyrese, Cooper Flagg, and Darren Harris, who was thankfully back from his injury. So we're happy to see him back in the court.
How did Foster, K2, and Borden win a 3-on-3 game against those guys? I'm floored. It tells you that Stanley Borden, I guess Stanley Borden was covering Cooper Flagg. He kind of had to be. There's sort of no other matchup that makes sense. Stanley, dude, my man. I can't believe, if you told me in advance that there was a team that had Cooper Flagg, Tyrese Proctor, and Darren Harris, and they were playing CFos, K2, and Borden, I'd be like, well, okay, what are they spotting them 8 points or 8 out of 11 points? I'm floored that they won that game, and congrats to them. It's adding to the already legendary summer that Con Knippel is having. There are people on the DBR boards on the Duke Basketball Report forum who are already believing that like Con's a lottery pick, and they may not be wrong.
Look, we'll see how everything progresses, but I'm liking what I'm seeing so far. I will say Team Foster won the 3x3 tournament that they had. They won the trivia. They won the
volleyball.
They won the volleyball. Yeah. And then 2K tournament was won by Team James. Team James was Sion James, Cameron Sheffield, and Malik Brown. Mason Gillis's team, this is the only one we haven't mentioned, Mason Gillis, Patrick Ngongba, and Isaiah Evans. I will say in the basketball shooting drill, Team Proctor won most of those. Team James won one, but Cooper Flagg and Darren Harris and Tyrese Proctor were winning all the shooting drills, which, yeah, that sounds about right, other than maybe like Con giving them a run or two. Yeah. But I really enjoyed that episode, and just, again, taking what is an achievement for one of their teammates and turning it into a fun activity, but also that's helping to breed that camaraderie and chemistry that's going to be useful during the season, I think is genius. I also want to say, Jason, one, like I mentioned, some of the shirts that these players are wearing, I want them. Grayson Allen
Not
is in
sure
the
they're
video.
available to everybody, man.
They're not available at retail. I'm just asking on a personal favor. If there's a 2X line around and nobody's wearing it, I can model it for you. DBR podcast at gmail.com if you have one of them. But I will say the One Vision shirt that Grayson Allen was wearing was really cool. And also shout out Grayson Allen for coming back and kind of talking about why he's back at school. And I think, Jason, it leads into a lot of other guys who were back on campus recently, including at the football game that I know you want to mention. But I will say in the thing of Grayson Allen, I like that he's talking about the drills that he is doing to help himself get better. And now, Grayson Allen, doesn't feel like long ago, Grayson Allen was receiving the advice from the guys who were coming back to campus. Now he is the guy coming back to campus to dish out the advice as the 3-point champion in the NBA.
Yeah, exactly. The leading 3-point shooter in the NBA. He's just signed a really, really nice new contract that has Grayson set for life. Grayson and Grayson's grandkids are now set for life. But yeah, it was very cool to see him back on campus in the Duke Blue Planet video. But then also we got some little videos over the weekend. This was big man come home week. Mark Williams, Vernon Carey, Jahlil Okafor, Derek Lively, Theo John, all those guys were on campus this weekend, as well as some guards. Jared McCain came back for this weekend. Trevor Keels and DJ Stewart came back. We mentioned Grayson Allen was around. And I just think it's kind of cool that they were all there, especially all these big men, at the same time that the Boozer twins were visiting. Cameron and Caden Boozer were in town taking you can tell they're taking their final visits. They're visiting Duke, they're visiting Miami, they're visiting Florida over the course of like the next 3 or 4 weeks. And these guys have to decide, and Cameron Boozer, of course, is the best big man in the class, in the entire freshman class, and considered a guy that you would build national championship aspirations around. And his brother Caden is a top 20-ish or so player in the class, and an outstanding point guard, a guy who's in control of the game. He reminds me a little bit. I've seen him play a little bit. Reminds me a bit of Trey Jones. That kind of profile. I don't know quite if he's going to have an immediate starting impact the way Trey did. But not far off from that in terms of the way he plays his game. Not a guy who's going to shoot a ton from the outside, but a guy who's going to be under control the whole time, play really good defense, and just be an outstanding passer. But anyway, for those guys to be on campus this weekend and get to experience so much of these other Brotherhood guys, I'm sure they have in the past. I mean, obviously, recruiting the Boozers to Duke is a little different than recruiting other guys because, their dad was here 25 years ago and knows the school incredibly well, and they have come back repeatedly over the years. It actually, I think, makes recruiting them a little bit harder. There are a lot of things about Duke, I think, oh my God, my first time I walked in the camera and that kind of, you hear about guys who, when Duke recruits them, they are sort of in awe of Coach K, in awe of the facilities and all that other kind of stuff. The Boozers have been seeing that since they were babies. So
Cameron is named after the gym. So
exactly.
He has that written, but as we've talked about in the show, the Boozers, one of the things that they are kind of discussing is they've said they want to kind of craft their own legacy. They don't want to live in the shadow of their father, which is completely understandable. And Duke's hard job is to sell them on the fact that, yes, you can come to Cameron, who you are named after. You can step into those hallowed halls. You can look up and see your dad's number in the rafters with Reddick's name above it, but it was still Boozer's number before Reddick got there, right? So you can see all of that and look and go, I want to be another person that is in these herald halls for what they accomplished and not for, your family legacy. And I think that's the thing is Caden might have that, might not be as set on this, but Cameron Boozer is going to be a dynamite pro very, very soon. And I think with him, he wants to craft a legacy. And the idea is, can he do that at Duke? That's the hard sale that Duke has that is unlike other schools where they can come in and say, yeah, you can craft your own legacy here. You have no ties here. So you can make it what you wish.
Yeah, and the reality is none of us know what they're going to pick. I think they've played it very close to the vest. As much as you talk about Carlos Boozer and his impact on his sons, the reality is that Carlos and his wife Cece have got divorced a little while back, and the kids are they spend more time with their mother than they do with their father. So winning over the mom is especially important here. As I mentioned, there's a few more weeks that they have to take their visits. There's no, they could wait as long as they want to decide, but a lot of the speculation out there is that it's kind of a Duke versus Miami race at this point. And I'll even go so far as to say I've heard just anecdotally from people who, pretend like they have an idea that Cameron Boozer, the big man, is a little more sold on Duke, and Caden Boozer, the point guard's a little more sold on Miami. So
yeah, that's what I've been hearing lately. So
yeah, so
and I heard that from Miami circles, which is
right,
probably tracking with some of the Duke people that are saying the same thing.
The two brothers do say they want to go someplace and play together. So we'll see how it all works out. Obviously, it'd be a big deal for Duke to get both of them, and we'll keep tracking that.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jason, as we move on, there's another article about NIL that, again, it feels like every week we're talking about an NIL article, but this one, as the others, are just as big as the others. It's in the New York Times. It's not in the Athletic. It's in the New York Times. I know you have seen it, so give the people a little bit about what they are calling the Black Book.
Yeah, the New York Times has this extensive article where they've gotten a copy of this. They call it the Black Book. It is a publication of sort of verified NIL deals that this one company has been keeping track of for several years now. And supposedly there are a lot of schools, virtually all the power conference schools, subscribe to this book and keep and have it as a resource, so that when someone comes in and says, "Hey, I'm a left tackle. I deserve to make X," they can look in the book and go, "Oh, a left tackle is supposed to make Y." And this is how they negotiate NIL deals. And there are several stats in this lengthy article by the New York Times that are really fascinating. The first is in football itself. They tallied up what the starters in football make in each of the 4 power conferences. In the Big 12, all the starters make a total of about $3.3 million. In the ACC, it's $4.6 million. So the ACC is paying a little bit better than the Big 12. Big 10's 5.2. So the Big 10 pays a little more than the ACC. But again, 3.3, 4.6, 5.2. I'm ready. You ready for the SEC number? Again, the Big 10's at $5.2 million for all their starters. The average SEC team, starting players, $14.4 million. Literally triple what the Big 10 is playing. If you're wondering, why do the SEC teams dominate so much in the polls and in national championships and all that other kind of stuff? It's because the SEC is just, the NIL collectives for SEC teams are forking out outrageous sums of money. It was fascinating to read about this. And by the way, they also pointed out that the average value of like the top 25 players or so at a smaller conference, like they picked a team in Conference USA, Liberty, who's in Conference USA. The NIL of all the Liberty starters, under 50 grand. There's a gulf there. When one conference is paying guys almost $15 million and another team is paying all their guys a total of $50,000. And that's group of 5. These group of 5 conferences, these are not the smallest conferences. These are still somewhat competitive. And it just shows you why they really can't be competitive with the power conference schools. And then also it got into basketball a bit. It says the average compensation for top tier basketball players, they say a roster today is costing about $3.3 million for a men's basketball team. By the way, they note that a women's basketball team roster is about $750,000. So NIL, it's perhaps the most important thing in forming a roster nowadays. And I just found this article. I'm not going to give away all the info in it. If you have a subscription to your New York Times, you should read this article, and it gives you a number of really fascinating perspectives on what it takes to field a team at this point. And it's worth noting that the NCAA has finally had a resolution, reached an agreement in the House lawsuit, and that as a result, power conference teams like Duke are going to be able to pay $20 million to all their athletes across all their programs. Sounds like most of that is going to have to go to the football team, and then basketball, and then on down the line. But that's one way that the NCAA is hoping to try and contain this rampant NIL at least a little bit.
And I think the one thing about that article and some of the stats that you mentioned is I went down a rabbit hole the other day and just kind of was looking at revenue from college football programs and then revenue overall. And I think, I was mentioning to you that, of course, like the major schools that we know of in the football space are at or near the top of all these rankings, Texas, Ohio State, Michigan, Alabama, those sort of schools. And when we looked at we were talking about the gulf in disparity between the amount of media money, TV money that the SEC and the Big Ten are getting versus the ACC, you're thinking, oh, the ACC is probably well down this list. Well, in the top 50, there was 8 teams from the ACC who were in that top 50, which means they're making well over $100 million a year in revenue. Now, how does that affect NIL? Well, you can't spend money if you don't have it. And I think the thing about Duke and some of these other programs is they need to figure out a way to get above. It feels like most schools have to figure out a way to get above $100 million in revenue across all of their sports. Because if they can't do that, then they can't go out and get the big, 5-star recruits that they're going for because they just don't have enough NIL money to throw around. That's where the NIL collectives are coming in. That's where some of these sponsorships by outside companies are coming in. The Nikes and the FedExes of the world who are sponsoring NIL collectives. This is where the money has to figure out how to regenerate itself. And of course, it all goes down to a lot of different things, right? One small thing, the game on Friday wasn't sold out. Sold out games are going to help. Obviously basketball we can't put more people in Cameron unless we build a new Cameron. But short of that, you have to figure out a way to maximize every dollar, and you have to figure out a way to bring in guys that are competitive, that can compete for championships, and also make it where they leave with the sense that, hey, you did right by them. And for as far as NIL money is concerned. So it's a big thing. And as this article comes out, stuff is going to change next week because that's how fast this thing is continuing to move. We feel like it at some point it'll slow down, but that day is not today. And I think the idea behind NIL is that if the NCAA doesn't get a grip on it, then it will become the Wild West where the haves and the have-nots will really succeed. But also, again, it's about this playoff and all the money that's in this new 12-team playoff. The best way to kind of up your ante, get into the playoff. Because once you get into the playoff, that money's coming to you, or at least more money's coming to you, more exposure in the form of free TV eyeballs. So you'll get multiple millions of people viewing your school. And that includes recruits who might say, hey, I could be the next person to leave a legacy at this particular school. And Duke should be there, right? And not saying Duke is going to compete for the playoff this year, but the goal is clearly to do that at some point, to compete for the ACC title, to get into the playoff, and where, again, you can make as much damage as you possibly can. So that will all help with the NIL money. But until then, we have to figure out a way to make those ends meet. And right now, for some of these schools, the math is not mathing. So that's the NIL. Jason, anything else before we wrap up?
No, I'm just I'm thrilled football's back. I'm just going to go ahead and say that. I didn't realize how much I missed it until I sat down and started watching the game. And it was fun to watch the Blue Devils get back out there competing. And I'm really looking forward to this week against Northwestern. One of my best friends in the world, he and his wife both went to Northwestern. They're big fans. I'm gonna have to come up with a creative, interesting little wager to make with them. By the way, speaking of wagers, someone on the DBR forums, Mountain Devil, had made a wager with me about whether Florida State would still be in the ACC when the season started. He lost that wager. I said, yes, they will still be in the ACC. And so he had to pay me a big old blueberry pie. It has been, Donald, it has been outstanding. I have been gorging on this blueberry pie for several days now, enjoying the spoils of my victory. If there's one lesson to take from the wagers on the Duke Basketball Reports forums, it is do not bet against Jason, because I always win. I always get my pie.
Jason, the pie could be sugar-free, but victory pie always tastes sweet. And so enjoy that pie. And Duke will enjoy its pie until it has to get back on the field and prepare for Friday night. We're going to come back later this week to preview the game against Northwestern. But until then, that will wrap it up for this episode of the Duke Basketball Roundup. Thank you as always for listening. And as always, if you have questions, comments, suggestions, our suggestion box is open, dbrpodcast@gmail.com. We will get to as many of the emails as we possibly can between now and Friday. But until then, for Jason Evans, I am Donald Wine. Again, this is the DBR Podcast. And now it is time for the Duke Band. They're playing us out, and they're going to take us home.